30 years. That's how long I spent turning the Whitlock name into something people whispered about with respect. 30 years of charity galas, of knowing which fork to use, of smiling while men twice my age tried to pat my hand like a child. And in one night, one dinner party, my son's new bride tried to reduce me to a punchline. She sat me with the staff like some forgotten aunt who couldn't be trusted with the good china. But here's what Rosalind didn't know. In this family, we don't throw tantrums. We bury our enemies in their own arrogance. And tonight, you'll see exactly how I made sure she never forgot her place. Have you ever had someone humiliate you just to prove they could? Maybe a coworker who stole your idea, a friend who mocked you in front of others, or a partner who made you feel small. Drop a comment below if you've ever wished you could serve their ego back to them on a silver platter, cold. This isn't just a story about revenge, it's about how I, Eleanor Whitlock, turned manners into a blade so sharp, Rosalind didn't feel it slide between her ribs until it was too late. What happens when a woman who's spent a lifetime playing the long game finally decides to strike? Stick around. By the end of this, you'll never underestimate the quiet ones again. The Whitlock name carried weight in places where money couldn't buy entry. For 3 generations, we'd cultivated something far more valuable than wealth: unshakable influence. My husband Charles used to say our family operated in the spaces between what was said and what was meant, in the pauses between polite applause. That was where real power lived. I'd spent 30 years mastering this delicate dance. While new money flaunted their latest acquisitions at charity galas, I quietly secured board positions where the decisions that mattered were made. When political candidates came begging for donations, I gave just enough to ensure they'd take my calls later. Even our household staff understood this game better than most executives. In our world, discretion was the ultimate currency. Then Julian brought Rosalind Voss into our lives. She entered every room like she was conquering it, her laugh a decibel too loud, her designer clothes still carrying the chemical scent of their packaging. Where we valued subtlety, she mistook it for weakness. How charmingly old-fashioned she'd purr when I hosted our traditional holiday dinners, her fingers tracing the rim of her wineglass, like she was calculating what it might fetch at auction. My son, my beautiful naive Julian, was utterly enchanted. He'd spent his life surrounded by people who understood the rules, and here was someone who treated them like suggestions. "Mom, she's not like anyone else," he'd tell me, as if that were a virtue rather than a warning. Rosalind's tech startup millions made from disrupting an industry that had functioned perfectly well without her became proof of her genius in his eyes. The cracks showed quickly. At Julian's birthday dinner, she interrupted my story about his grandfather's meeting with the governor to announce that influencers were the new royalty. When I mentioned our family's long-standing tradition of summering in Newport, she laughed. "How adorable that you still do that. Julian and I are thinking Bali next year, so much more Instagrammable." But the true revelation came the night before their engagement party. Passing by the library, I heard her on the phone. "Don't worry about his mother. By this time next year, no one will even remember the Whitlocks existed. Julian's so desperate to prove he's not stuffy, he'll let me rewrite his entire family history." That was when I understood. This wasn't just about my son, this was about erasure. Rosalind didn't want to join our family, she wanted to replace it. And that, my dear viewers, is the one mistake you never make with a woman who spent a lifetime learning how to win silent wars. Because when you've navigated the intricate webs of high society for decades, you recognize a spider the moment it starts spinning its web. And let me tell you something about spiders: their greatest weakness is never seeing the shoe coming until it's too late. The engagement dinner was to be held in the Whitlock Ballroom, a space that had hosted presidents and princesses, its walls whispering with a century's worth of carefully curated power. I'd personally overseen every detail, from the floral arrangements to the seating chart, as I had for every important Whitlock event since Charles passed. That's why I knew something was wrong the moment I entered. The room glittered under the chandeliers, but the energy was all wrong. Guests clustered in uneasy groups, their champagne flutes clutched too tightly. And then I saw it: my place card wasn't at the head table where it belonged. It wasn't even at one of the secondary tables for honored guests. My name sat atop a small round table near the kitchen doors, sandwiched between the head chef and Julian's childhood nanny. Rosalind materialized at my elbow, her emerald green gown cutting through the room like a knife. Eleanor, darling, she cooed, her fingers brushing my arm with all the warmth of a cashier handing me change. I hope you don't mind, we've done things a little differently tonight. Julian and I wanted to honor the people who really make this family run. Her smile was all teeth, her eyes bright with triumph. Behind her I could see Julian shifting from foot to foot, his gaze darting between us like a spectator at a tennis match. The room had gone quiet. 50 pairs of eyes watched as Rosalind guided me toward the staff table with the exaggerated care one might use with an invalid. It's just one dinner, Julian muttered when I caught his eye, his voice barely audible over the clink of silverware. The staff table was a study in discomfort. Mrs. Henderson, our housekeeper of 30 years, looked ready to faint. Marco, the head chef, kept wiping his palms on his apron. "We saved you the least sticky chair, ma'am," he whispered, his usual booming voice reduced to a murmur. And that's when I did something no one expected. I laughed. Not the polite, tinkling laugh of a society matron, but a full, rich sound that echoed off the crystal and gilt. I saw Rosalind's smile falter, saw Julian's brow furrow in confusion as I took my seat between the kitchen staff with the grace of a queen accepting her throne. "Thank you, Rosalind," I said, loud enough for the room to hear. What a thoughtful reminder of where true loyalty lies. I accepted a glass of wine from the terrified server, making sure my fingers brushed hers in a show of solidarity. Though I must say, if you're going to play these games, you really should learn the rules first. The tension in the room could have been cut with one of Marco's prized knives. Rosalind's cheeks flushed an unbecoming shade of pink. Julian opened his mouth, then closed it again, his Adam's apple bobbing. As the first course was served, a delicate foie gras that suddenly tasted like victory. I made a show of engaging the staff in conversation, drawing laughter from people who had served my family for decades, but had never dared laugh in this room before. With every joke, every shared glance, I could see Rosalind's carefully staged humiliation crumbling around her. By the time dessert arrived, half the guests were stealing glances at our table with something dangerously close to respect. The other half were watching Rosalind with new eyes, seeing not a disruptor, but a child who had overplayed her hand. And that, my dear viewers, was the moment I realized something beautiful. She'd given me the perfect weapon. Because when your enemy thinks they've humiliated you, they stop watching for the knife. Like this so far, smash that like button, because the real drama starts now. Rosalind just made her first mistake. The next one will cost her everything. The morning after the engagement dinner, I woke with the clarity that only comes from absolute resolve. Rosalind wanted to play games of status and exclusion. Very well. I would show her how those games were won by someone who'd been playing them since before she was born. The plan took shape over breakfast in my private sitting room, the same room where Charles and I had once plotted corporate takeovers. Now I was orchestrating a different kind of acquisition, the systematic dismantling of my future daughter-in-law's reputation. Everyone in our circles knew about the legendary Van Derlen pearls, the mythical necklace rumored to have been smuggled out of Russia during the revolution, its whereabouts unknown for decades. What no one knew was that I happened to possess a remarkably convincing replica, commissioned years ago for a charity auction. I arranged a private viewing at the home of Margot Leclerc, a society doyenne, who owed me several favors. "Just convince her it's the real thing," I told Margot over tea. "Let her think she's stumbled upon the social coup of the season." The invitations went out on thick, embossed cardstock, the kind that leaves paper cuts on ungloved fingers. Only 50 made the list. Rosalind, of course, was not among them. The night of the viewing, I watched from Margot's upstairs balcony as Rosalind arrived uninvited, her face flushed with determination. She'd clearly bullied Julian into bringing her as his +1. My son looked miserable, his collar too tight around his throat. The pearls sat on blue velvet in a locked display case, spotlit like holy relics. Around them, actors I'd hired from the city's best theaters played their parts flawlessly. The Russian collector, the nervous auctioneer, the European heiress who kept sighing over the pearls. I saw the exact moment Rosalind took the bait. Her pupils dilated, her fingers twitched at her sides. When the auctioneer announced the bidding would start at $250,000, she actually licked her lips. "I'll pay double." Rosalind's voice cut through the murmur of the crowd. "Just announce my name when you award the lot." The room went silent, even my actors nearly broke character. Julian grabbed her arm. "Rosalind, what are you doing? We don't have that kind of..." Don't be provincial, Julian, she snapped, shaking him off. To the auctioneer, the Voss Whitlock bid is $500,000. That was my cue. From the shadows, I nodded to Margot, who made a great show of being torn before sighing. Against my better judgment, sold to Miss Voss Whitlock. The applause was polite, but puzzled. No one understood why Margot would part with such a treasure, until the next morning's papers hit. The Daily Post's headline said it all. Tech It Girl duped in fake pearl scandal. Page 6 featured photos of Rosalind at the auction, her face twisted in triumph. The accompanying article detailed how she'd been tricked into buying worthless costume jewelry, complete with quotes from experts, more of my actors, about the obvious flaws in the replica. But the real masterpiece was the video that surfaced later that day, security footage of Rosalind bragging to a friend in the ladies' room. The old bitch Margot didn't even know what she had. Those pearls are worth 10 times what I paid. By noon, Hash Pearl Gate was trending. By dinner, Julian's phone was blowing up with calls from family lawyers. And by midnight, Rosalind was standing in my foyer, her makeup streaked with tears, screaming about suing everyone in sight. I sipped my sherry and let her exhaust herself. When she finally paused for breath, I said only, "You should have checked the provenance, dear. In our world, that's the first thing they teach you." Then I turned to Julian. His face was ashen, but his eyes, finally my day, were clear. "The wedding is off, I presume." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. 3 days after Hash Pearl Gate trended worldwide, Julian finally came to see me. Not in the sunlit morning room where we used to take our coffee, but in my private study, the one with the heavy doors that muffled shouting. He stood framed in the doorway, his shoulders hunched like a man carrying invisible weights. "I've been going through Rosalind's emails," he said without preamble. His voice was raw, as if he'd been screaming or sobbing, probably both. I set down my pen but said nothing. The best interrogators know silence extracts more than questions ever could. Julian's laugh was a broken thing. "There were receipts, Mom, for everything. That chance meeting at the art gallery, planned for weeks, the shared love of jazz. She hired a tutor, his hands clenched at his sides. She had a fucking dossier on our family." I allowed myself one small sigh before rising to pour him a brandy. The crystal decanter caught the afternoon light as I spoke. "The pearls were plastic, you know. Not even good plastic." That finally broke him. Julian's knees buckled, and he caught himself on the edge of my desk. "Why didn't you stop me? When you knew, when have you ever listened?" The words came out softer than I intended. "You needed to see her for yourself. We found Rosalind in the garden, her phone pressed to her ear. Sue them into oblivion," she was shrieking. Then she saw us. Saw Julian's face. Something in her expression shifted, calculations whirring behind her eyes. "Jules," she began, reaching for him. "Don't." Julian recoiled as if burned. Was any of it real? Or was I just, what? "Your ticket to a better zip code." Rosalind's mask slipped for just a second, long enough to reveal the cold pragmatism beneath. "You knew what I was when you proposed," she said, her voice dropping its usual melodic lilt. "You wanted someone who wouldn't treat you like glass. Well, here I am. You used me to buy class," Julian snapped. Turns out Mom was the only one selling. The silence that followed was broken only by the distant hum of a lawnmower. Then Rosalind's phone buzzed, and buzzed again, and again. By sunset, the headlines had mutated. "Pearl scammers past exposed fake heiress's college fraud." "Voss startup funded with stolen designs," sources claim. "Socialites' dead parents very much alive." "Living in Ohio." My favorite was the tabloid photo of Rosalind's actual childhood home. A perfectly lovely suburban house that bore no resemblance to the artist's loft in Paris she'd invented. I never confirmed how those stories reached the press, though it's remarkable what loyal staff will do when they see their employer seated with the help. The breakup was spectacular, of course. Rosalind threatened lawsuits, then tears, then both simultaneously. Julian watched it all with the hollow-eyed stare of a shell-shock victim. It wasn't until we were alone that he asked the real question. "Did you arrange all of this?" I considered lying. Then I reached into my desk and produced the fake pearls. $19.99 from a costume shop, their plastic sheen obvious in the firelight. "I just gave her enough rope, darling. She tied the noose herself. And the best part, the pearls were plastic. How far would you go to protect your family? Drop a comment if you think Eleanor went too far, or not far enough. And don't forget to subscribe, because karma's just getting warmed up. The night of the new dinner party arrived with the kind of calm that only follows a storm. The Whitlock mansion was alive again, not with tension or whispered rumors, but with genuine laughter and warmth. I sat at the head of the table, exactly where I belonged, surrounded by those who understood the true meaning of loyalty. The guests were a mix of old friends, trusted allies, and the staff who had stood by me through the ordeal. They were no longer invisible background figures, but honored participants in a celebration of resilience. The silverware gleamed under the soft glow of the chandeliers, but it was the atmosphere that shone brightest, a quiet triumph that no scandal could tarnish. Julian was there too, his eyes clearer than I had seen in weeks. He no longer wore the dazed look of a man caught in a whirlwind, but the steady gaze of someone who had learned a hard lesson about trust and family. We exchanged a glance across the table, a silent acknowledgement of battles fought and won. As the evening unfolded, I found myself reflecting on the nature of power. It isn't the loud declarations or the dramatic confrontations that define strength. True power lies in the silence before the storm, the patient, calculated moments when you prepare your move while others are busy making noise. Rosalind's downfall was not just a victory for me, but a reminder that arrogance and haste are the greatest enemies of those who seek to climb without understanding the ground beneath their feet. She rushed in, blinded by ambition and entitlement, unaware that the game she thought she was playing had been mastered long before she arrived. This story, like many others, is a testament to the fact that revenge is not about cruelty, it's about justice served with precision and dignity. It's about knowing when to strike and when to wait, when to speak and when to let silence do the talking. If this story resonated with you, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my situation? Remember, new stories drop every day,